My name is Lawrence Kim, and I'm 68 years old, sitting here in the dark because my electricity was shut off this morning, which is how I discovered that my son David had forged my signature to take out multiple loans against my fully paid house in San Jose, accumulating over $100,000 in debt that I knew nothing about while using my home as collateral for his desperate gambling addiction. When the utility company informed me that my power was disconnected for non-payment, I thought there had been a mistake, but that phone call led me down a rabbit hole of financial devastation that revealed my own son had been systematically destroying my life savings and putting my home at risk of foreclosure to feed his addiction to online poker and sports betting. I'd love to know where you're listening from today, so please share your location in the comments below. And if this story moves you, I hope you'll consider subscribing, because what happened to me shows how identity theft can happen within families, and how gambling addiction can turn children into criminals who destroy their parents' financial security. Let me start by telling you about the house that represents everything I work for in America, so you can understand what it means to face losing it because of my son's lies and fraud. I immigrated to the United States from South Korea in 1978 with my wife Soonja and our 2-year-old son David, carrying nothing but hope for a better life and a determination to build something meaningful for our family. For 25 years, I worked as an engineer for a semiconductor company in Silicon Valley, often putting in 60-hour weeks and taking on extra projects to earn the money we needed to purchase our modest 3-bedroom house in San Jose. The house cost $180,000 in 1985, which represented every penny we had saved plus a mortgage that took us 30 years to pay off. Soonja worked as a seamstress while David was growing up, and together we made every sacrifice necessary to ensure that our son could have opportunities we never had. We lived frugally, drove used cars, and saved every possible dollar so that we could pay off our mortgage early and provide David with a college education. The house became the symbol of our American dream realized. It represented security, stability, and the legacy we planned to leave for David and his future family. Every room held memories of birthday parties, holiday celebrations, and the quiet satisfaction of homeownership that my parents in Korea could never have imagined. Soonja passed away from cancer 3 years ago, and losing her was devastating for both David and me. She had been the emotional center of our family, the one who kept us connected and grounded in our values of hard work, honesty, and taking care of each other. After her death, David and I became closer as we supported each other through our grief. David had always been a bright child who excelled in school and seemed destined for success. He graduated from UC Berkeley with a degree in computer science and found work as a software developer for a tech startup in San Francisco. Soonja and I were proud of his achievements and confident that he would build a successful life for himself. But what I didn't know was that David had developed a serious gambling problem during college that had been hidden from Soonja and me. He had started with small bets on sports games and poker games with friends, but the addiction had gradually escalated to online gambling that consumed more and more of his time and money. David was skilled at hiding his gambling problem because his technical background made him comfortable with online platforms and digital transactions that were difficult for some of my age to understand or monitor. He also had access to sophisticated gambling websites that made it easy to place large bets quickly and frequently. The gambling addiction had cost David his job, his savings, and his apartment, but he had managed to hide these losses from me by creating elaborate stories about his work situation and living arrangements. When I asked about his career or living situation, he always had convincing explanations that made his life seem stable and successful. After Soonja's death, David began visiting me more frequently, which I interpreted as his way of coping with grief and wanting to maintain our family connection. He would help with household tasks, assist with technology issues, and spend time talking about memories of his mother and plans for the future. But David's increased presence in my home was actually motivated by his need to gain access to my personal documents and financial information. He was researching ways to use my house as collateral for loans that could fund his gambling addiction and pay off debts that were becoming increasingly dangerous. David's gambling debts had reached a point where he owed money to individuals who were threatening violence if he didn't repay them quickly. He had borrowed from multiple sources, including online lenders and private individuals who charged extremely high interest rates and used intimidation to collect debts. The pressure from creditors and loan sharks was pushing David toward increasingly desperate measures to raise money quickly. He had already exhausted his credit cards, borrowed from friends and co-workers, and sold everything he owned of value. Using my house as collateral was his last resort to generate the large sums he needed. During his visits to my house, David began photographing and copying important documents, including my driver's license, social security card, bank statements, and property records. He was building a collection of materials that would allow him to forge my identity and apply for loans without my knowledge. David also observed my daily routines and learned about my financial habits, including which banks I use, how I manage my accounts, and what my signature looked like on various documents. He was conducting reconnaissance that would enable him to commit identity theft more effectively. The first loan that David obtained using my forged signature was for $25,000 from a predatory lender that specialized in providing quick cash to people with gambling debts. The lender required minimal documentation and didn't conduct thorough verification of the applicant's identity or ownership of the collateral property. David used sophisticated software to create convincing forgeries of my signature and other identifying documents. His technical skills allowed him to produce fake materials that were good enough to fool lenders who weren't conducting careful scrutiny of the loan applications. Over the course of 6 months, David obtained multiple loans from different lenders, each using my house as collateral and my forged signature as authorization. He was careful to space out the applications and use different lenders to avoid creating obvious patterns that might trigger investigation. The total amount of debt that David accumulated using my identity and property was over $100,000, spread across 5 different loans with various terms and interest rates. Some were short-term loans with extremely high interest, while others were longer-term agreements with balloon payments that would come due within a year. David used the money from these loans to pay off his most pressing gambling debts and to continue betting in the hope of winning enough to repay everything and solve his financial problems. But gambling addiction doesn't work that way, and the new money only enabled him to dig himself deeper into debt through continued betting. Meanwhile, I was completely unaware that my house was being used as collateral for multiple loans or that my identity had been stolen by my own son. I continued living my normal life, managing my modest retirement income and maintaining my property, without any knowledge of the financial time bomb that David had created. The first sign that something was wrong came when my electricity was suddenly shut off without warning. When I called the utility company to inquire about the disconnection, they informed me that my account was seriously overdue and that multiple bills had gone unpaid for several months. I was confused by this information because I had always paid my bills on time and had never missed a utility payment in my entire life. When I checked my bank account, I discovered that several automatic payments had been rejected due to insufficient funds, which was impossible given my careful money management. Further investigation revealed that someone had been making large withdrawals from my checking account and that my savings account had been nearly depleted through transfers that I had never authorized. The bank records showed transactions that I didn't recognize and signatures that looked like mine, but that I had never made. When I contacted my bank to report the unauthorized transactions, they began an investigation that revealed the extent of David's fraud. The bank's forensic analysis showed that someone with access to my personal information had been systematically draining my accounts to make payments on loans that had been taken out in my name. The bank's investigation led to the discovery of the multiple loans that David had obtained using my forged signature and my house as collateral. Each loan had required payments that David had been making using money stolen from my accounts. But when my accounts were depleted, the payments stopped and the loans went into default. The realization that my own son had committed identity theft against me and had put my house at risk of foreclosure was devastating and shocking. David had violated every principle of trust and family loyalty that Sunja and I had tried to instill in him throughout his childhood. When I confronted David about the loans and the stolen money, he initially tried to deny any knowledge of the transactions and suggested that someone else must have gained access to my personal information. But when I presented him with evidence from the bank investigation, he finally admitted to what he had done. David's explanation for his crimes was that he had been desperate to pay off gambling debts to dangerous people who had threatened to hurt him if he didn't repay them quickly. He claimed that he had been forced to use my house as collateral because he had no other options and was afraid for his life. David expressed remorse for what he had done and promised to find a way to repay the loans and restore my financial security. But the damage was already done, and the legal and financial consequences of his actions were beyond his ability to fix through promises and good intentions. The lenders who had been deceived by David's forged documents were demanding immediate repayment of the full loan amounts, plus interest and penalties. When they learned that the loans had been obtained through fraud, they threatened to foreclose on my house unless the debts were satisfied quickly. I found myself in the impossible position of facing foreclosure on my fully paid house because of debts that I had never incurred and loans that I had never authorized. The legal system offered some protections for identity theft victims, but the process of proving fraud and recovering damages would take months or years. Meanwhile, the lenders were moving quickly to protect their interests by initiating foreclosure proceedings that could result in the loss of my home within weeks. The legal protections for identity theft victims were not designed to provide immediate relief from foreclosure actions. I contacted an attorney who specialized in elder financial abuse and identity theft, but he explained that my case was complicated by the fact that the perpetrator was my own son, and that family relationships often made these cases more difficult to prosecute and resolve. The attorney helped me file police reports and dispute the fraudulent debts, but he warned me that the legal process would be lengthy and that there were no guarantees that I would be able to save my house from foreclosure before the courts could sort out the fraud claims. The stress and anxiety of facing the loss of my home while dealing with the betrayal by my son was overwhelming. I felt like I was living in a nightmare where everything I had worked for was being destroyed by the person I had loved and trusted most. For weeks, I barely slept or ate as I tried to navigate the complex legal and financial systems that would determine whether I could keep my house or become homeless because of my son's crimes. The uncertainty and fear were consuming my physical and mental health. But something unexpected happened that would change the trajectory of my case and provide hope for saving my home. Detective Maria Rodriguez, who was investigating David's case, had specialized training in elder financial abuse and recognized that my situation represented a particularly egregious example of family fraud. Detective Rodriguez contacted the district attorney's office about prosecuting David for elder abuse in addition to identity theft and fraud. Elder abuse charges carried more serious penalties and could result in restitution orders that would help me recover my losses more quickly. The district attorney agreed to pursue elder abuse charges against David, and the prospect of serious criminal penalties motivated him to cooperate with prosecutors in developing a restitution plan that would help restore my financial security and save my house from foreclosure. David agreed to plead guilty to elder abuse and fraud charges in exchange for a sentence that included supervised probation and a requirement that he make full restitution for all damages caused by his crimes. The restitution order included the full amount of the fraudulent loans plus interest and legal costs. More importantly, David's employer had been contacted about his legal situation, and they agreed to garnish his wages to ensure that restitution payments were made consistently and reliably. This arrangement provided me with a guaranteed income stream that could be used to pay off the fraudulent debts. The combination of criminal prosecution, civil restitution, and wage garnishment created a comprehensive solution that addressed both the legal and financial aspects of David's crimes. While the process was complicated and stressful, it ultimately provided a path to recovery and justice. The lenders who had been defrauded agreed to accept the restitution payments as satisfaction of the debts, and the foreclosure proceedings against my house were dismissed once it became clear that the loans had been obtained through fraud and that restitution was being made. Today, more than a year after discovering David's fraud, my house is secure and my financial situation has been restored through the restitution process. While my relationship with David remains damaged, he is receiving treatment for his gambling addiction and is working to rebuild his life in a healthier way. The experience taught me about the importance of protecting personal financial information, even from family members, and about the resources available to elderly people who become victims of financial crimes. It also showed me that recovery is possible even from the most devastating betrayals when the legal system works properly. Most importantly, I learned that my house represents more than just financial security. It represents my life's work and my connection to Sunja's memory. Fighting to save it was about preserving not just my shelter, but my dignity and my legacy for future. That's my story. How my son forged my signature to mortgage my house for his gambling debts and nearly made me homeless, but how the justice system helped me recover everything and hold him accountable. Sometimes our greatest betrayals come from those we love most, but sometimes the law provides a protection and justice that families cannot.